Hi everyone, my name is Rebecka Elkert and I'm on the board of SWESIF, and I would like to welcome you all on behalf of SWESIF to today's seminar. Deforestation. We hear about it, we're all concerned about the speed and how it has surged to its highest levels in recent years since 2008. The Amazon rainforest is, as we know, a vital carbon store that slows down global warming. But the Amazon is also home to about 3 million species, plants and animals. And the scale and speed of the current deforestation is actually very hard to comprehend. What could we as investors do? I'm very keen to hear about the tools I could use as an investor and learn more about that today during this seminar. And with that said, I hand over to Flora Gaber, project manager at AP7, who has made this seminar possible and who is the moderator today.
Thank you very much, Rebecka. My name is Flora Gaber and I work for AP7. AP7 is one of the Swedish government-owned pension funds. It manages the default option in the premium pension system. In the sustainability team, we mainly work with active ownership, and we tend to focus on the systemic issues such as climate change and biodiversity. Our strategy is to collaborate with other investors with the overall aim to reach impact in the real economy. AP7 initiated this webinar since we, like many investors, are realizing the importance of global biological diversity. Also, like many investors, we are struggling with how we should address this issue. While many of you on this webinar probably understand the critical role that healthy ecosystems play in the health of our planet, it's not fully clear how investors should best act to improve the status of them. Therefore, we have invited two organizations today to talk about how they are addressing this issue. These are concrete tools for investors, and this is the whole idea of this webinar. To present tools for investors. This is what you can do concretely. Both organizations are members of our alliances, investor alliances, multi-stakeholder alliances, and AP7 has recently joined these alliances. Both will talk about deforestation, which is one of the main reasons of biodiversity loss. The agenda will start with introduction of the problem. The topic of today is deforestation in Brazil. And like Rebecka said, with an estimated total number of species reaching up to perhaps 3 million, Brazil is regarded as the most biodiverse country in the world. Deforestation is one of the main causes of biodiversity depletion. And Brazil holds the Amazon rainforest as well as the Cerrado, two ecosystems high in biodiversity and under threat of deforestation. So with that introduction, I would like to present Emine Isciel from Storebrand, who will talk about the IPDD Investor Alliance, and Faazi Adam from FAIRR that will talk about the Statement of Support for the Cerrado Manifesto, which is a multi-stakeholder initiative. Our first speaker today is Emine Isciel. She is the head of climate and environment at Storebrand Asset Management since 2018. Prior to joining Storebrand, Emine worked for the Norwegian Ministry of Climate and Environment with multilateral environmental agreements advising the government on sustainability policies and strategies, and leading the work on implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. She has also worked for the United Nations, advising on the SDGs. Emine will talk about the IPDD Alliance. So, welcome, Emine.
Thank you so much, Flora. I'll be sharing a presentation. Sorry. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Like this?
Yes, now it's perfect.
Thank you. And I'm still impressed how, my technical skills haven't improved after 1 year with this COVID. But thank you so much for having me here today. I'll be talking about deforestation and an investor-led initiative called IPDD, which stands for Investors Policy Dialogue on Deforestation. So these are some of the headlines we have seen over the past 2 years. We see a growing investor concern around deforestation and also a demand for companies to take action. I think it was just last week we saw BlackRock announce that they request their investee companies to publish no deforestation policies and minimize their impact on nature. So why is deforestation becoming an emerging issue, and what can investors do about it? That is the question. I'm not going to go into all the ESG risk related to deforestation because I only have 15 minutes, but I just wanted to mention a couple of issues which is important to have in mind. So first of all, it is of course related to climate risk. I think institutional investors are increasingly considering climate-related financial risk and opportunities in their investment decisions. In the past, we have particularly focused on the energy sector, but the significance of deforestation to climate change is becoming more relevant to financial institutions. Deforestation alone accounts for approximately 15% of global emissions. I think it was in IPCC's Land and Climate Report in 2019, highlighting that reduced deforestation is actually vital for the achievement of the Paris Agreement. We also see that all IPCC pathways to limit global warming to under 1.5 degrees require a global halt to deforestation. But deforestation has also contributed to the current biodiversity crisis we are in, and this is also becoming an emerging issue for investors. Approximately 70% of deforestation is connected to agricultural commodity production, and investors are exposed to biodiversity loss primarily through agriculture. And loss of biodiversity and ecosystem services can affect a company's productivity through soil degradation and disruption of hydrological cycles. Brazil could face devastating water shortages, which will have serious consequences as the country is mostly reliant on hydropower. 80% of the terrestrial species lives in the forest. When land is clear, the consequences for animals and plants are quite severe. But the consequences are quite severe also for millions of indigenous peoples and forest-dependent communities. Most rainforest countries lack legal frameworks to secure the rights of indigenous peoples to their traditional lands, territories, and resources. So as you can see, there are a variety of deforestation-related risks that companies face. We often talk about reputational risk, regulatory risk, and operational risk. But I just wanted to draw your attention to the tightening regulatory framework, which is making financing deforestation even more risky for us as investors. For the past year, we have seen some really interesting developments in various countries, but worth mentioning, both in the EU and the UK, laws are being considered to limit their overseas deforestation footprint, which would require companies in the EU and in the UK to show that their products and supply lines are free from deforestation. This will make it difficult for companies to make business with markets that are considered as high risk, such as Brazil and Indonesia. So moving over to the next slide. So deforestation is not a new topic for our investee companies, especially that the ones that are involved in production, trade, and use forest risk commodities, such as palm oil, soy, timber, and cattle. In 2014, governments and companies met in New York and made a joint public commitment to halve deforestation by 2020 and end it by 2030. And what we have seen is that since 2014, many companies have developed commodity-specific policies and announced commitments to end deforestation. A progress report from end of last year showed that we are not on track to meet the 2020 target. And this is also quite evident in our conversations with investee companies, that most of them, they have really good policies in place, but the implementation remains weak. So what is the state of the tropical rainforest? This report was launched just last week from the Rainforest Foundation Norway, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, basically showing that 2/3 of the world's original tropical rainforest cover has been degraded or destroyed by people. And the main drivers, as I've mentioned, are the soft commodities such as palm oil, soy, cattle, and timber, but it's important to also mention mining and infrastructure. The study analyzed tropical rainforests from 2002 to 2019 and found out that since 2002, the area of rainforest lost is greater than the size of France. More than half of the destruction since 2002 has been in the Amazon, followed by Indonesia. And then the question is, what can investors do about it? So, first of all, we can engage with our investee companies, either individually or through collaborative platforms. So Storebrand has been in dialogue with companies on this issue since 2013, and we joined the PRI groups in 2018. PRI is coordinating collaborative investor engagement with companies that have either direct or indirect exposure to commodity-driven deforestation. So there are several work streams, one on soy, cattle, and palm oil, but also in addition, there's a work stream on indirect financing where investors can engage with banks in Asia, which often provide loans to palm oil companies. And I think until recent times, investor engagement has largely been limited to dialogue with companies. It was until the IPDD was formed. Around this time last year in May, we decided in Storebrand to send a letter to the Brazilian embassy in Norway to express concern around escalating deforestation and that this was creating uncertainty about conditions for investing in the country. We know that Brazil has a very good track record of combating deforestation, while at the same time providing favorable conditions for business and investments. And this is quite complementary to the work we're doing with corporates. So I think we came to the recognition that companies and investors can only play their role in a sustainable economy if governments are setting the right framework. Whether the topic is environment or health, governments have a key role to play to promote and support sustainable business practices. And this letter was the start of the initiative, which is called IPDD. So basically, in a very short time, we managed to mobilize a group of international investors, and some of you are together with us at this webinar today. And in June 2020, we sent an open letter to the Brazilian embassies in all our home countries. I think we were represented in 9 countries. The letter expressed our concerns over escalating deforestation in recent years, combined with concerns about weakening environmental and human rights policies, as well as lack of effective enforcement. I think it is quite fair to say that we were not sure what the feedback would be and quite surprised by the immediate and high level of response. I remember the letters were sent on a Monday morning in June, and within a few days, the governor of the central bank reached out to Storebrand and wanted to understand some of our concerns. He offered a meeting with the Amazon Council, chaired by the Vice President Mourão. So, within a few weeks, we had a meeting with the Vice President Mourão, the Minister of Agriculture, the Minister of Environment, and the Foreign Affairs. And some promises were made from their side. From our side, we expressed 5 tangible and concrete outcomes with clear link to investment risks. We explained that we are concerned about the financial impact that deforestation may have on our clients and investee companies by potentially increasing reputational, operational, and regulatory risk. Right after our meeting, Bolsonaro announced a 120-day Amazon fire ban. So here at this slide, you can see all the meetings that we had since the beginning of the initiative. I think I also wanted to mention a meeting we had with the President of the Congress, which I personally believe was a very important meeting. His name is Rodrigo Maya, and he used to be the president of the Congress until February this year. He has been a central figure in ensuring that the system of check and balances is effective, and that the legislative is able to block some of the more controversial measures proposed by the Bolsonaro government. There was particularly one controversial measure we were concerned about, which would legalize the private occupation of public land in the Amazon. We had a meeting with him in July or August last year, and the president of the Congress, he made a public promise that the Congress will not vote on any controversial matters related to the environment that may damage Brazil's image abroad. I'm not going to go into the details of all the meetings, but the important question is, did we have any impact? Given IPDD was only formalized in July 2020, I think it remains too early to see any actual progress against the 5 outcomes of the Brazil workstream. And it is also particularly true when it comes to such a complex issue as deforestation and engaging at the government and policy level, given the many different stakeholders and dynamics involved in Brazil. And currently, there's also a COVID crisis going on. However, I think it's not to say that it has not had an impact in other ways, which are just as important in terms of increased awareness and greater engagement from key stakeholders. The government demonstrates its responsiveness to the investor concerns. They did not need to meet us. While the messaging from the top is not always encouraging to our efforts, the IPD has been encouraged that this does not run through the entire government. For example, in September last year, we had a meeting with the governor of the central bank, and they launched a new sustainability agenda. At a meeting beginning of this year, we had a second meeting with Vice President Mourão, chair of the Amazon Council. He presented a strategic plan for us on how to fight illegal deforestation and confirmed that the council shares the objectives of IPDD. And at a recent meeting in March this year, the National Treasury of Brazil informed they're currently working on ESG framework and also working on giving investment funds and rating agencies more data and clarification on ESG topics. I think also 2 years ago, discussions and requests on deforestation would probably be dismissed by the Bolsonaro government as NGO rhetorics or protectionism. But we have, as an investor coalition, successfully conveyed to the government that financial market participants consider issues like deforestation to be material risks. Countries face losing access to capital markets or face higher borrowing costs if they do not ensure effective management and protection of natural resources. But most importantly, I think we have created a space, I don't know if I would call it a safe space for other stakeholders, especially in Brazil, also working in this area, who share similar concerns as us, to reinforce their messaging and align their efforts. We witnessed something really interesting right after the letter went out. We had CEOs of Brazilian companies in the agricultural sector in Brazil, making similar requests as IPDD. We had former government ministries, I think it was the ex-finance ministers, requesting similar asks. And then we had the 3 major banks in Brazil entering into a dialogue with the vice president on the protection of the rainforests. So this was a very interesting development to see, and none of these actions were coordinated in any way. So currently, we have had a quite interesting journey. There has been a lot of media coverage as well. We're of course encouraged by the initial response and dialogue with the Brazilian government, but also the interest from the investor community to work together with us. So we decided to set up a 2-year work program on deforestation to work systematically with the Brazilian government. We are now more than 50 investors representing $7 trillion, including the major players from Brazil. It is an investor-led initiative supported by PRI and the Tropical Forest Alliance, which is the World Economic Forum initiative. They're currently functioning as our secretariat. But it's also important to mention that this is not an initiative about Brazil. We have also recently expanded the initiative to Indonesia because we do not think it's fair to single out Brazil. I think that was all from my side.
Thank you very much, Emine. Let's see. So our second speaker of today is Faazi Adam. She's a research and engagement manager at the FAIRR initiative. Faazi has been with the FAIRR initiative since 2017. This initiative is a network for investors focusing on the food industry, and it's actually free to join for investors. It provides research and engagement services focused on material ESG risks and opportunities in protein supply chains. Faazi will talk about the statement of support for the Cerrado Manifesto. So, welcome, Faazi.
Great, thank you so much, Flora, and thank you to SpaceF and AP7 for inviting me to speak here today about the Cerrado Manifesto. If you just give me a moment, I will share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see that. Great, I'm going to take that as a yes. Okay. So as Flora mentioned, before I start, I think I'll just give a brief introduction of FAIRR and who we are for those of you that don't know us. As Flora mentioned, we are an investor network focused on ESG in the protein industry. We provide research and engagement services to our members looking at some of the most material risks in this industry that affect not only companies that produce protein, but companies throughout the food value chain. And for universal owners, companies that contribute to systemic risks that can affect a number of companies across different sectors. We have just turned 5. We've grown very quickly since our founding 5 years ago. We now have over 250 members, including AP7, Storebrand and SEB, and our members have 33 trillion in combined assets. So the way that we affect change throughout the food system and help investors manage some of the ESG risks in this sector is by providing very, very tailored and focused research and engagement products looking at the whole spectrum of food production, right from the food producers that raise the animals all the way through to the retailers and restaurant chains that will eventually sell these products. And in the future, we will also be starting to look at some of the pharmaceutical companies that supply antibiotics that are used in many of the food producers' production practices today. So going on to the statement of support for the Cerrado Manifesto that I'll be talking about today. As was mentioned earlier, the Cerrado is a very important biome in Brazil. It's adjacent to the Amazon biome, but perhaps a little bit less well known. The Cerrado is not a rainforest, it's a savanna. It's incredibly biodiverse. It's home to about 5% of the world's biodiversity. It's the source of many of Brazil's rivers, and maintaining this native vegetation is very important for maintaining some of the local rainfall patterns that are so important to agricultural production. It's also an area of Brazil where a lot of soy is produced. Estimates vary, but some suggest that around 60% of all Brazilian soy is produced in the Cerrado. And over time, the Cerrado has seen a lot of its native vegetation decrease. Estimates suggest that it has already lost 50% of its original area, primarily driven by agricultural production, primarily of soy and beef products. Given the importance of the Cerrado biome for maintaining biodiversity and protecting local weather patterns in the Brazilian region, a few years ago, back in 2017, a coalition of Brazilian civil society organizations launched the Cerrado Manifesto, calling on businesses that operate in the Cerrado, businesses that source soy from the Cerrado, and investors to come together to find solutions to the rapid deforestation that was occurring in the region. And businesses responded very quickly. Just a month later, 23 businesses formed the statement of support for the Cerrado Manifesto, pledging their support for the aims of the Cerrado Manifesto and a commitment to work together to find solutions to these problems. A year later, in 2018, the group realized that they needed to do more to involve investors in this conversation as well, to make sure that all possible levers of change were being applied. And at that time, FAIRR joined the steering group and recruited investors to the coalition. So nowadays, the coalition's expanded quite significantly. Initially, it had 23 signatories. There are now 164 signatories altogether, including 59 investors with around $8 trillion of AUM. And you can see here on the slide the balance of signatories throughout the soy value chain. Again, lots of finance representatives, and many throughout the value chain, from farming and food processing, again, all the way through to retail and food service. The group is coordinated by a steering group that currently has 10 organizations that participate in this, and they are representatives of each section of the value chain. So broadly speaking, the main goal of the SOS is to halt deforestation and native vegetation loss in the Cerrado. And there are two key ways in that we're doing this at the moment. The first of those is companies and investors coming together to engage Brazilian soy traders that buy soy directly from the farmers, process the soy, and then export to various markets. We're engaging Brazilian soy traders to agree to a 2020 cutoff date, supported by monitoring, reporting, and verification systems to ensure that this is adhered to. So what that means in practice is we are asking the soy traders to only source soy that has not been deforested after this date. And secondly, we are working on a very innovative solution to some of the challenges that companies face in trying to implement this. One of these is sort of the more social aspect of this. Brazilian soy farmers often produce soy on deforest land because, due to a number of complex kind of land speculation challenges, it is often cheaper for farmers to buy areas of land that have native vegetation and then clear the land for soy production rather than produce on existing cleared land. So there's a recognition there that soy farmers need some sort of tangible financial support if they are to make this switch. And a key part of what this statement of support is trying to achieve is to encourage the buyers of soy to contribute to a fund that will compensate soy farmers for not deforesting native vegetation in order to produce soy. So companies and investors are coming together around both of these key objectives. When it comes to the soy traders, both companies and investors have been using various ways, leveraging their relationships with them to encourage them to adopt a 2020 cutoff date. And when it comes to contributing to this fund, we're very pleased to say that 3 companies, Tesco, Greek Seafood, and Nutreco, have already contributed funds, and investors are playing their part in this by speaking to investee companies, raising awareness of the goals of the Cerrado Manifesto, and asking companies to consider whether contributing to this fund would be a viable way for them to meet their own deforestation objectives. So in preparation for this webinar, I actually asked some of the investors that participate in this coalition to give some insights on how this has helped them with their own goals. And their answers were quite interesting. The first of these was additional corporate insight. By participating in the group, investors can gain insights on how other companies, investors, NGOs are working together to achieve zero deforestation goals. And some of the insights from engaging the traders and other stakeholders that are important to achieving these goals can help inform investorship activities. Secondly, by joining the Cerrado Manifesto, it allows investors to get involved in broader engagement campaigns that complement their existing work. For example, through the engagement with the traders, that complements other zero deforestation engagements that the investors might be working on, the opportunity to co-file resolutions or to send letters of support of resolutions, and also to shape the development of tangible solutions that involve all actors across the value chain, including Brazilian soy farmers and the companies that will eventually purchase the soy. So I thought I'd give a couple of examples of some of the positive impact that we've had during this collaboration. It has certainly not been an easy one. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of stakeholders to engage, and given the kind of challenging political context, of course, there are several hurdles that we've had to overcome over the past few years, but we're very, very pleased to say that we are starting to see some movement on this issue. Earlier this year, shareholder resolutions were filed at ADM and Bunge, two of the soy traders operating in the region, asking them to disclose more information about their anti-deforestation work and commit to broader zero deforestation goals. And in terms of how that played out at ADM, we're very pleased to share that the resolution has actually been withdrawn, and the company just a few days ago announced a new anti-deforestation policy, stating that it aims to achieve full traceability of direct and indirect sourcing of soy in Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina, and eliminate deforestation from its supply chains by 2030. At Bunge, the resolution remains filed, and interestingly, through our engagement with the company, we've learned that the board of directors is actually recommending that shareholders vote for the resolution, which is an interesting step forward. And at the moment, the group is encouraging investors to write to the board of directors, reinforcing the importance of the ask of this resolution. And we're looking for more investors to join this activity all the time. If this is something that might interest you, I highly encourage you to get in touch with me after this meeting to learn more about that. So that's a very quick overview of the Cerrado Manifesto statement of support and all of the work that we're doing on that end. That's everything I had to say for now, so I will leave it there.
Thank you very much, Faazi. So I would like to encourage everybody who has a question to post it in the chat, and I'll read it out loud. Or if you, by any reason, cannot see the chat function, send an email to info@soesif.org, I think. So just let me start with a couple of questions and see if we can get the discussion going. So Emine, this is very interesting. You're engaging with the government in Brazil. And why do you engage with the government and not companies, considering that investors normally would engage with, their holdings?
Yeah, thank you. Storebrand has been engaging with companies with operations in Brazil and also Indonesia, other countries, since 2012 on deforestation. 2012, 2013, that is when our work on deforestation started. I think, and we do this individually, but in 2018, we joined the PRI working groups. We think it's much more effective if we are a coalition of investors working together systematically, together with our investee companies. So it's not like we're not working with our investee companies, but we think the policy dialogue that we have with governments is complementary, because we can play our role we're ready to play our role in a sustainable economy, but the conditions also need to be in favor of companies that wants to be sustainable. I'll give you an example of the issue we have with access to data. So in Brazil, they have a good data cover on forest, but with the cattle companies, with the major companies, in Brazil, there has been some challenges in accessing this data, and it's something that the government can release. So we need to work together alongside with the government to ensure traceability in the indirect supply chain. We're not able to do this without the Brazilian government allowing us this kind of information.
Okay, so I understand that this PRI working group and the IPD Alliance are in close collaboration with each others.
Exactly. So yeah. The PRI is supporting IPDD. We're working very closely together.
Right. And so for investors such as ourselves, that it's more natural to talk to companies and we want to become more active within the EPDD Alliance.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, just to let people know on this call, it really depends on you how active you want to become. You can be, more a supporting investor, and that's much less active, statement on letters and so on, listening into to meetings. But you can also become much more active if you want to, and it really depends on the resources. And the strong part is that we're doing this in collaboration with each others. So for
Exactly.
instance, for us, we want to engage with companies within the IPDD Alliance, and you're telling me, yes, of course, that would be, joining the PRI workstream.
Exactly. So it's not possible to engage with companies through IPDD. Then you have to either do it individually or through PRI. I also want to mention that through the IPDD, we're also providing educational sessions on deforestation to increase more awareness and understanding of financial risks, and because it's such a complex issue and it depends in which country you're in or which commodity you're talking about. If you're talking about palm oil, the solution is very different for palm oil than for soy, for example. And also, I also want to underline that this initiative is not about tropical forests. It's about deforestation in general. We're also concerned about the cerrado, which is a savanna, another biome that is important for biodiversity. So we talk about native vegetation in the terms of reference.
Right, and you also mentioned, the topic of today was Brazil, but you mentioned that there is, a work stream, for the Indonesia rainforest for those who want to join that. And how far has that come in comparison to the Brazil one?
Well, I think they have, it's recently established. They have developed their work plan, similar to the Brazil work stream. But we have to also bear in mind that the political contexts are very different. While I would maybe say that the Brazil work stream has a more reactive approach, we see that the development in Indonesia is going very well, and it's much more of a proactive approach. We cannot have the same approach to Brazil as to Indonesia.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I've been actually part of both meetings, and I noticed that it was more proactive in the Indonesian part. So, I thought it was very interesting when you talked about, you initially sent the investor letter to the Brazilian embassies in the countries of the investors' residence, but you actually received a response from the government, and it really, really fast, which was wonderful. And you have had a dialogue with them since then. Why do you think this dialogue has been successful?
I think it has been successful because, as I said when I tried to explain a little bit about the impact, if this had happened 2 years ago, it would most likely be dismissed as NGO rhetorics or protectionism from Europe. I think the success of this initiative lies in the fact that we were a global coalition. We were represented in Japan, in Europe, in the Nordics, in the US, in Brazil, now in Australia. It's a global coalition. We respect the national, the principle of national sovereignty and the Brazilian government's decision. We are concerned about the financial risk for our investee companies. So I think it was a global coalition which made it forceful. It was investors for the first time bringing this issue up. It was not the NGOs, and it was purely an economic discussion. It was about financial risks. We tried to explain, how we see the package from the EU, the sustainable finance package, impacting the funds that we're providing. A sustainable fund that we are providing cannot have companies like Marfrig and ADM and Bunge defined as sustainable. It's not going to happen. So we tried to explain this to the government. At that time, I think many of our partners and colleagues and government counterparts were not even aware of a taxonomy legislation. This was also quite new to them.
That's interesting, and it is a a good combination to kind of, like you said, you cannot just talk to the companies because the companies kind of point at the government and say, but we don't have enough information. So you kind of address both. One final question then. What type of activities would you like to see more of in the future?
Yeah, I think we have had, really good meetings at the very high level with the ministers, with the governor of the central bank. I would like to see more, more technical collaboration with government entities in Brazil. And that was always the aim, bringing the companies, the investors and the government, the government counterparts and try to find solutions for example, how can we best find industry solutions for the cattle industry to monitor their indirect supply chain. So in the future, I hope for more, like more technical working groups and not all these high level meetings, because, promises are very fine and all these diplomatic and nice conversations, but we need to see tangible results.
True. And also your KPIs, they're linked to actual impact, actual real world impacts. And that's what we want. So thank you very much, Emine. I don't know is there anybody that has any questions for Emine? Somebody maybe that sent an email to Swesif, or because I cannot see it in the chat. No?
I cannot see anything, Rebecka, here. So
yeah.
No questions so far.
Yeah, okay, good to know. Then I will, thank you very much, Emine. I will turn to, oh, there's a question.
Wait, yeah, here's a question. Can you see it, Flora?
Yes, I can. I have had technical issues with mine, so I didn't see the chat function before. But so the question is, do you invest in forest plantations that can supply timber to the market and save the natural forests, or agroforestry?
I assume that's one is for me. We're invested in almost 5,000 companies, Rafal. So I will need to, it's very specific, so I will need to get back to you. If you send me your email, I'm happy to provide more information on that.
Mm. And just, to reply from AP7, so we're invested in a large amount of companies all over the world. So we're a universal investor. So even if we have also impact mandates, our main focus is, with regard to sustainability, is actually active ownership. Right. So then I will turn to Faazi. Faazi, you were talking about the Cerrado, and why is it important to address both the deforestation of the Amazon and the Cerrado at the same time? How do these problems interact?
Well, I think specifically thinking about soy, there's been a tremendous amount of progress made focusing on the Amazon as a result of the Amazon soy moratorium, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Deforestation driven by soy in the Amazon has actually gone down an incredible amount. There is obviously, when it comes to all things deforestation related in Brazil, given the vast land area and the difficulty of monitoring, there are some sort of disputes over the exact data, but some studies suggest now that only 3% of deforestation in the Amazon is driven by soy. So there's been a huge amount of progress there, but deforestation in the Cerrado has actually been increasing for quite some time. And I guess there are very different challenges facing the two biomes. So the Amazon soy moratorium basically encourages traders to do what we are trying to get them to do in the Cerrado now, and not purchase any soy from soy traders from soy farmers that are deforesting land. And there are lots of regulations around this as well that require landowners in the Amazon to conserve a portion of their properties. However, in the Cerrado, a lot of deforestation is actually legal. Landowners in the Cerrado are only required to conserve 20% of their properties. So that means that government enforcement of laws are not actually enough to prevent deforestation there. So a key part of why the companies are putting money towards financial incentives is that the legal incentives are just not there in the Cerrado to prevent soil-related deforestation.
Yeah, and like you said, the Cerrado is equally important in biodiversity. It's such high in biodiversity.
Absolutely.
And with this alliance, you know, coming from an investor, I know that you explained like where do investors fit in, but this is such a large alliance and it's multi-stakeholders. What do you think are the strongest contributions from investors here? Where would we actually create some kind of impact?
I think some of the strongest contributions from feedback we've heard from companies that participate in the coalition, it's very, very useful to have investors exert pressure on them to improve sort of their activities on zero deforestation for a lot of internal sustainability teams. As I'm sure many of you will heard through your engagements with other companies, investor pressure on some of these issues really helps them make the case internally for sustainability policies. It's helped them take the case all the way up to C-suite level, whereas in the past, perhaps this was a conversation that was mainly happening in sustainable sourcing teams. So I think investor pressure is really important to help escalate issues within a company. And as we've sort of hinted at throughout this discussion, the importance of collaboration really, really helps to drive impact as well. So once we started getting investors involved, particularly the larger investors that are invested in thousands of companies, a huge number of those will be those that are kind of directly relevant to some of the asks of the engagement. So we can really amplify some of these asks by getting investors to engage on these issues as well.
Yeah, and maybe I should add just a little bit from my end. You know, I've been working with the FAIRR for a number of months now. And it has been wonderful guidance and governance from you. So it's really, you know, from the investor listening in, it's like you think, okay, I should do a lot now. It's so complicated, but no, with, you know, Faazi in the team, you get wonderful guidance, and you can with actually, it becomes very efficient with a little resource from the investors. But as an investor, if you want to engage a little bit more, then, for instance, you can put your own resolution, and then, you know, Faazi will kind of coordinate, like so that everybody else can join the resolution if they want to. That was just a reflection from my end. So with the dialogue, how much progress with the dialogue have you seen so far?
That's a very good question. I think we've definitely seen sort of mixed progress among the traders, and it's very difficult to benchmark them, because I think one of the key challenges that we're facing at the moment is that in private discussions with a lot of the soy traders, they're very, very much sort of behind some of our goals. They absolutely agree that more needs to be done to progress towards zero deforestation, but they find it difficult to communicate this externally for a number of reasons. Some of that is, especially within the larger companies, making sure that the whole company is aligned behind the ask and prepared to realign sourcing policies in line with them. And also, of course, the political environment that we've discussed at length today. And I think that's really why initiatives like the IPDD are so important for investors to get behind, because we have heard from some of the soy traders that the political environment is a major constraint with them coming out and making public statements about moving towards zero deforestation. So I think engaging governments is absolutely crucial to changing sort of the conversation and the actions that companies are able to take, not just within Brazil, as Emine mentioned, in other countries as well.
True. And in your view, what have been the major obstacles for success?
So in addition to the political environment, I think one of the learnings that we've had over the course of this engagement is to make sure that we are engaging with all of the stakeholders that are relevant to this. I think when we first started out, we were focused very much on the soy traders and engaging with ABIOVI, which is the Brazilian association, the trade association that they are a part of. But I think some of the learnings from this is that we really have to make sure we're engaging all levels of Brazilian society. So we're working harder to maintain good relationships with Brazilian NGOs who are very close to a lot of the actors on the ground. And another key priority, I think, going forward will be to try and develop relationships with some of the organizations that represent Brazilian soy farmers as well, to make sure that some of the solutions that we're proposing do involve local Brazilian stakeholders, that they are relevant to these stakeholders, and that it's something that ultimately they will want to take on board as well.
Okay, thank you very much. So there's still a lot of things to do.
Absolutely, yeah, long way to go.
So if there is anybody on the call that would like to add a question, please go ahead. You have a couple of minutes left. If someone has sent an email to SWESIF, I don't know if let me see if no. Right. Okay, then. Thank you very much, both Emine and Faazi. This has been very valuable for us. I would like to ask or hand over to Rebecka.
Thank you for that. And I'll try to make a quick wrap up before we end. And I believe I have learned so far that today that the deforestation is not only limited to rainforests, it's also about savanna like the Cerrado, which is equally important. And here the Cerrado Manifesto is something that you could engage in to make a difference as an investor. And also, as discussed, to engage with companies is of course important, but when it comes to deforestation, it's also very important to engage with companies because they set the framework. And least, what did I say here? Sorry. And I believe that being part of an initiative is not just a chance to make a difference. We have heard that it's also a great way to learn more and very educational. And as I interpret our speakers, the next step in the presented initiatives is to get even more concrete from policy to practice. And by that, I would like to say thank you to our speakers, Emine and Faazi. Great work, very interesting. And also thank you to our moderator, Flora, who has guided us through the seminar. And to Kim for all her practical help setting up this seminar. And by that, I hand over to Flora for some last words.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to thank you too as well, Rebecka, for the introduction and the wrap up, and for our speakers and for the investors also listening to this webinar. And get in touch if you want to get involved. And like I mentioned, I mean, it really depends on how much resources that you have. If you have little resources, you can get involved a little bit, which is valuable. If you have more resources, you can get involved more. So I think that's actually one of the great things also with these alliances. It really depends on how much time and resources that you have. So thank you very much, everybody. I think this has been a great webinar, very, very concrete on what investors could do, and also lead to collaboration, to lead to real world impacts, and working with biological diversity, which I think is one of the most important things to work with. So thank you very much.